The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle, as 8-year-old Princess Charlotte walked alongside her governess toward the main courtyard. She wore a simple blue dress with white ribbons, her hair neatly braided, and carried a small wicker basket filled with homemade biscuits she had helped the castle cook prepare the night before. As they approached the east gate, Charlotte noticed something unusual. One of the Queen's guards, a tall man with kind eyes beneath his iconic bearskin hat, seemed different from the others. While his fellow guards stood perfectly still in their ceremonial positions, this particular guard appeared to be struggling. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his rifle, and Charlotte could see beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air. The young princess had always been curious about the guards who protected her family. She often wondered what it felt like to stand so perfectly still for hours, never moving, never speaking, always watching. Her mother had explained that these brave men and women had dedicated their lives to keeping the royal family safe, and Charlotte held deep respect for their service. As she drew closer, Charlotte noticed the guard's breathing seemed labored. His chest rose and fell more rapidly than normal, and his usually perfect posture showed slight signs of strain. The other guards remained motionless, their eyes focused straight ahead, following the strict protocol that governed their every movement during duty hours. Charlotte's governess, Miss Sarah, was busy reviewing the day's schedule on her tablet and hadn't noticed the guard's condition. The princess slowed her pace, her natural empathy drawing her attention to someone who might be in distress. She had inherited her mother's compassionate nature and her father's determination to help others, traits that often led her to notice things that adults might overlook. The guard, whose name tag read Sergeant Thompson, had been standing at his post since dawn. He was a 26-year-old man who had served in the military for 8 years, with tours in Afghanistan and Iraq before joining the prestigious Queen's Guard. What nobody knew was that he had been battling severe anxiety since returning from his last deployment, and today the weight of his invisible struggles was becoming too heavy to bear alone. Charlotte stopped walking entirely now, her blue eyes fixed on Sergeant Thompson with genuine concern. She could sense that something was wrong, even though she couldn't fully understand what it might be. The basket of biscuits in her small hands suddenly felt important, not just as a treat for the staff, but as something that might bring comfort to someone who needed it. The castle grounds were quiet except for the distant sound of gardeners working and the occasional tourist group being led through the outer courtyards. Charlotte found herself at a crossroads between following protocol and following her heart. She had been taught proper royal etiquette from a young age, but she had also been taught the importance of kindness and compassion above all else. Miss Sarah finally looked up from her tablet and noticed that Charlotte had stopped walking. She followed the young princess's gaze to the guard and was about to encourage Charlotte to continue their walk when she too noticed something seemed amiss. However, as a member of the royal household staff, she knew the strict rules about interactions with the Queen's Guard during their duties. Charlotte took a small step forward, her mind racing with thoughts of how she might help. She remembered her grandmother's words about leadership being about service to others, and her mother's teachings about treating everyone with dignity and respect regardless of their position. The biscuits in her basket seemed to glow with possibility as she contemplated what she should do next. Charlotte's heart raced as she made her decision. Despite knowing the rules about not disturbing the guards during their duty, she felt compelled to act. Her small feet moved quietly across the stone pathway as she approached Sergeant Thompson, who continued to struggle with his breathing while maintaining his rigid stance. Miss Sarah whispered urgently behind her, "Your Highness, please remember the protocol." But Charlotte's compassionate nature had already taken control. She had watched these guards countless times, admiring their dedication and discipline, but she had never seen one in such obvious distress. As Charlotte drew nearer, she could see that Sergeant Thompson's eyes were slightly glazed and his jaw was clenched tight. The morning sun reflected off the sweat that had begun to form along his hairline beneath the heavy bearskin hat. His breathing had become more shallow and rapid, and Charlotte recognized these signs from when her younger brother Louis sometimes had his anxious moments. The other guards remained perfectly still, their training preventing them from acknowledging what was happening to their colleague. They could see Charlotte approaching, but their duty required them to maintain their posts without deviation. The weight of military discipline kept them frozen in place, even as their hearts went out to both the struggling sergeant and the concerned young princess. Charlotte stopped just a few feet away from Sergeant Thompson and looked up at him with her innocent blue eyes. She could see the pain and struggle in his expression, though he fought valiantly to maintain his composure. The princess understood that speaking directly to him might put him in a difficult position, so she simply stood there for a moment, letting her presence be known. Sergeant Thompson's peripheral vision caught sight of the small figure in blue standing nearby. His military training screamed at him to ignore the distraction and maintain his position, but something about the princess's gentle presence began to calm his racing heart. He had heard stories about the young royal's kindness from other staff members, but he had never experienced it firsthand. Charlotte slowly reached into her wicker basket and pulled out one of the homemade biscuits. It was shaped like a flower and decorated with simple icing, clearly made by small hands with great care and love. She held it up so that Sergeant Thompson could see it clearly, her eyes meeting his with unmistakable compassion. The gesture was small but profound. In that moment, Charlotte wasn't acting as a princess bound by royal protocol, but as a human being responding to another human being in need. She had noticed his struggle when others had not, and she refused to simply walk away and pretend everything was normal. Miss Sarah watched from a distance, torn between her duty to maintain proper protocol and her admiration for Charlotte's natural instinct to help others. She could see that the young princess was acting from a place of pure compassion, and despite the potential breach of etiquette, she found herself moved by the scene unfolding before her. Other castle staff members began to notice the unusual situation. A gardener paused in his work, kitchen staff peered out from nearby windows, and even some of the other guards stationed at different posts became aware of what was happening, though they remained bound by their duties to stay in position. Charlotte's simple act of offering a biscuit to a struggling guard was becoming something much larger. It was a moment that would challenge the rigid structures of royal protocol and military discipline, forcing everyone involved to choose between following rules and following their hearts. The young princess stood her ground, her small hand extended with the biscuit, waiting to see how Sergeant Thompson would respond to her gesture of kindness. Sergeant Thompson felt his chest tighten further as he struggled with an impossible choice. Every fiber of his military training demanded that he maintain his position and ignore all distractions, including the sweet princess standing before him with such genuine concern. Yet his human heart was breaking under the weight of his anxiety, and Charlotte's simple gesture of kindness felt like a lifeline in an ocean of protocol and duty. The sergeant's mind raced back to his deployment days when small acts of kindness from local children had meant everything to him and his fellow soldiers. He remembered a little girl in Afghanistan who had once offered him a flower, and how that moment of pure humanity had sustained him through some of his darkest days overseas. Now, standing in the safety of Windsor Castle, he found himself facing a similar moment of connection. Charlotte remained perfectly still, her small hand extended with the flower-shaped biscuit. She didn't speak, understanding somehow that words might make the situation more difficult for the guard. Instead, she simply waited with the patience that only children seem to possess naturally, her eyes conveying a message that transcended royal protocol or military regulations. The weight of Sergeant Thompson's anxiety began to shift as he focused on Charlotte's peaceful presence. His breathing slowly started to regulate as he found himself drawn into the calm energy that the young princess radiated. The panic that had been building in his chest for the past hour began to ebb, replaced by something he hadn't felt in months, a sense of being truly seen and cared for by another human being. Miss Sarah watched nervously from her position several yards away, knowing that this moment would either become a beautiful example of royal compassion or a significant breach of protocol that could have serious consequences. She found herself silently praying that somehow both the princess and the guard would find a way through this situation without either of them facing disciplinary action. Other members of the castle staff had begun to gather at windows and doorways, drawn by the unusual scene unfolding in the courtyard. Word was spreading quietly through the servants' quarters about the young princess and her attempt to help one of the guards. Some whispered concerns about protocol, while others marveled at Charlotte's natural compassion and bravery. The head of security, Colonel Williams, had been alerted to the situation and was making his way across the castle grounds. His mind wrestled with competing responsibilities, maintaining the strict discipline required of the Queen's Guard while also protecting the well-being of his soldiers and respecting the royal family's values of compassion and service. Sergeant Thompson's eyes remained fixed straight ahead as his training demanded, but he could see Charlotte clearly in his peripheral vision. The innocent determination in her posture reminded him of why he had joined the military in the first place, to protect and serve people exactly like this brave little girl who cared enough to break protocol when she saw someone in need. The morning sun had risen higher now, casting different shadows across the courtyard and highlighting the surreal nature of the standoff. A princess and a guard, both bound by different sets of rules and expectations, both trying to do what they believed was right in a moment that would test the very foundations of the institutions they represented. Charlotte shifted slightly, adjusting her grip on the biscuit but never lowering her hand. Her determination was quiet but absolute. She had made up her mind that this guard needed kindness more than the world needed perfect protocol, and she was prepared to stand there as long as necessary to ensure he understood that someone cared about his well-being. Colonel Williams arrived at the scene and immediately assessed the delicate situation before him. His trained eye quickly took in Sergeant Thompson's obvious distress, Princess Charlotte's unwavering compassion, and the growing crowd of staff members who had gathered to witness this unprecedented moment. As a veteran military officer with 30 years of service, he had never encountered a situation quite like this one. The colonel's first instinct was to politely escort the princess away and address Sergeant Thompson's condition through proper military channels. However, something about the scene gave him pause. He could see that Charlotte's presence was actually having a calming effect on the struggling guard, and he recognized the signs of a panic attack that was beginning to subside rather than escalate. Charlotte sensed the colonel's approach but didn't turn around. She had committed herself to this act of kindness and wasn't about to abandon Sergeant Thompson, now that he seemed to be responding to her presence. Her young mind understood that sometimes the most important rules were the unwritten ones about treating people with dignity and compassion when they needed it most. Sergeant Thompson felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease as his breathing gradually returned to normal. The flower-shaped biscuit in Charlotte's small hand had become a focal point that helped ground him in the present moment, rather than allowing his mind to spiral into the dark places that anxiety often took him. He realized that this 8-year-old princess had somehow accomplished what months of military counseling had failed to achieve. Miss Sarah approached Colonel Williams cautiously, ready to explain the situation and take responsibility for not preventing Charlotte's breach of protocol. However, the colonel raised his hand gently, indicating that he wanted to observe the situation a little longer before taking any action. His years of experience had taught him that sometimes the best leadership meant knowing when not to intervene. The other guards remained at their posts, but several of them were deeply moved by what they were witnessing. They had all served alongside Sergeant Thompson and were aware of his struggles, even though military culture made it difficult for them to address such issues openly. Seeing their colleague receive such pure, uncomplicated kindness from a member of the royal family touched something deep in their hearts. Charlotte finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper but clear enough for Sergeant Thompson to hear. "My mummy says that everyone deserves to know they're not alone," she said simply, still holding out the biscuit. "Would you like this? I made it myself with Cook yesterday, and we made extra ones because sharing makes everything taste better." The simplicity and sincerity of her words cut through all the complexity of military protocol and royal etiquette. In that moment, Charlotte wasn't speaking as a princess to a guard, but as one human being to another, offering the most basic form of comfort that existed, the knowledge that someone cared enough to notice when you were struggling. Sergeant Thompson felt tears beginning to form in his eyes, though his military training kept them from falling. The princess's words echoed something his own mother used to tell him when he was a child, facing his own fears and anxieties. The connection between past and present, between a scared little boy and a struggling soldier, between human need and human compassion, created a moment of profound healing. Colonel Williams found himself facing a decision that would define not only this moment but potentially set a precedent for how the royal household and the Queen's Guard would handle similar situations in the future. He could see that Sergeant Thompson was recovering from his anxiety attack, largely due to Princess Charlotte's intervention, But he also knew that allowing a guard to break protocol, even in response to royal kindness, could have far-reaching implications. The castle grounds had grown quiet except for the gentle rustling of leaves in the morning breeze. Even the tourists in the distance seemed to sense that something significant was happening, though they were too far away to understand the full gravity of the situation unfolding between a young princess and a struggling guard. The moment of decision had arrived. Sergeant Thompson stood at the crossroads between his military duty and his human need for connection. Charlotte's patient presence and genuine offer of kindness had created a space where healing could occur. But accepting her gift would mean breaking the sacred protocol that governed every moment of his service as a Queen's Guard. Colonel Williams stepped forward, his boots clicking softly on the cobblestones. The assembled staff members held their breath, wondering if he would end this touching scene or find a way to honor both the princess's compassion and the guard's duty. The colonel's weathered face showed the weight of his decision as he approached the unlikely pair. "Your Royal Highness," Colonel Williams said gently, bowing slightly to Charlotte, "I can see that you've noticed Sergeant Thompson might need some kindness today." His voice carried respect for both the princess's intentions and the gravity of the situation. Charlotte turned to face him, her hand still extended with the biscuit, her eyes showing no fear or regret for her actions. "He looked sad," Charlotte replied with the honest simplicity that only children possess. "Granny always says that when someone looks sad, we should try to help them feel better. I thought maybe a biscuit might help." Her words carried no awareness of the protocols she had challenged, only the pure motivation of a child who had seen someone in pain and wanted to ease their suffering. Sergeant Thompson's breathing had stabilized, and the color was returning to his face. Charlotte's presence had indeed helped ground him through his anxiety attack, and he found himself experiencing a clarity he hadn't felt in months. The young princess had somehow cut through all the noise in his mind and reminded him of the simple human connections that made life meaningful. "Colonel," Williams looked at Sergeant Thompson and could see the improvement in his condition. As both a military leader and a human being, he recognized that sometimes compassion had to take precedence over protocol. He had spent his career following rules, but he had also learned that the best rules were the ones that served humanity, rather than hindering it. "Sergeant Thompson," the colonel said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that only came with decades of leadership, "I believe Princess Charlotte has made you an offer of friendship and support. While we cannot abandon our duties, I think there are moments when accepting kindness becomes part of our service to the crown." The words hung in the air, like a bridge between two worlds. The rigid structure of military discipline and the flowing grace of human compassion. Sergeant Thompson felt his heart rate slow to normal as he realized that his commanding officer was giving him permission to accept Charlotte's gift without compromising his honor or his position. Charlotte's face lit up with hope as she sensed that something positive was about to happen. She had learned from her parents that sometimes doing the right thing required courage, and she was proud that she had found the bravery to reach out to someone who needed help. The biscuit in her hand suddenly felt like the most important gift she had ever given. Miss Sarah watched in amazement as the situation unfolded in a way she had never expected. She had been prepared to manage a protocol crisis, but instead she was witnessing a moment of pure humanity that transcended all the rules and regulations that usually governed life at the castle. Her respect for both the young princess and the wise colonel grew exponentially. The other guards remained at their posts, but their hearts were racing with anticipation. They had all experienced moments of struggle and doubt, and seeing their colleague receive such genuine care from a member of the royal family filled them with a renewed sense of purpose and pride in their service. Sergeant Thompson slowly turned his head to look directly at Princess Charlotte for the first time. His eyes met hers, and in that gaze he found understanding, acceptance, and the kind of unconditional kindness that could heal wounds that had seemed permanent. The simple act of being truly seen by another human being began to restore something in his spirit that had been broken for far too long. With Colonel Williams's permission hanging in the air like a blessing, Sergeant Thompson made his choice. Slowly, carefully, he moved his left hand from his rifle and reached toward Princess Charlotte. His movements were deliberate and respectful, maintaining as much of his military bearing as possible while accepting this extraordinary gift of human kindness. Charlotte's smile bloomed across her face like sunshine breaking through clouds as she gently placed the flower-shaped biscuit into the sergeant's outstretched palm. Their hands touched briefly, and in that moment something magical happened. The weight of protocol and the burden of anxiety seemed to lift, replaced by a simple understanding between two people who had chosen compassion over convention. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," Sergeant Thompson said, his voice thick with emotion but steady with renewed strength. The formal address couldn't mask the genuine gratitude that filled his words. He looked down at the small biscuit in his large hand, and for the first time in months, he felt truly hopeful about his ability to overcome the challenges he faced. Charlotte nodded solemnly, understanding somehow that she had just participated in something much larger than sharing a snack. "I hope it tastes good," she said simply. "But mostly I hope it helps you remember that you're not alone." Her words, spoken with the wisdom that sometimes flows through children, struck everyone present as profound and healing. Colonel Williams watched the exchange with deep satisfaction. In his decades of military service, he had learned that true strength often came from knowing when to bend without breaking, when to honor the spirit of duty, even if it meant adapting the letter of regulations. Today he had witnessed both a princess and a soldier demonstrate the kind of courage that couldn't be taught in any manual. The assembled staff members began to understand that they had just witnessed history in the making. This wasn't just a sweet moment between a child and a guard. It was a demonstration of the values that the royal family embodied, that compassion should guide action, that protocol should serve humanity rather than rule it, and that sometimes the most important leadership happened in the smallest gestures. Sergeant Thompson carefully tucked the biscuit into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. He resumed his formal stance, but something fundamental had changed. His posture was still perfect, his attention still sharp, but the crushing weight of anxiety had been replaced by a quiet sense of connection and purpose. The princess had reminded him why his service mattered, and why his struggle was worth continuing. Miss Sarah approached Charlotte with tears in her eyes, proud beyond words of the young girl's natural instinct for kindness and her courage in following through on that instinct, despite the potential consequences. She realized that she had just learned an important lesson about leadership from an 8-year-old, and she would carry that lesson with her for the rest of her life. Charlotte looked up at Sergeant Thompson one more time and gave him a small wave. "I'll ask Cook to make more flour biscuits tomorrow," she said cheerfully. "Maybe you and the other guards would like some too." Her offer extended the circle of kindness beyond just one person, showing her understanding that everyone deserved to feel cared for and appreciated. The sergeant nodded gratefully, and for the first time in his career as a Queen's Guard, he allowed a small smile to cross his face while on duty. Colonel Williams pretended not to notice this minor breach of protocol, understanding that some rules were meant to be broken when the result was healing and hope. As Charlotte prepared to continue her walk with Miss Sarah, she turned back to the colonel. "Thank you for helping," she said simply. "My daddy always says that the best leaders are the ones who know when to follow their hearts." Her words captured the essence of what had just occurred and acknowledged the wisdom that the colonel had shown in allowing compassion to guide his decision. The morning sun had climbed higher now, warming the castle grounds and casting everything in a golden light that seemed to bless the extraordinary moment that had just unfolded. What had started as a simple walk through the castle had become a powerful reminder of the healing that was possible when human beings chose to see and care for one another. As the days passed following that remarkable morning, the effects of Charlotte's simple act of kindness rippled throughout Windsor Castle like stones thrown into still water. Sergeant Thompson returned to his duties with a renewed sense of purpose, his anxiety episodes becoming less frequent as he remembered the young princess's words about not being alone. The flower-shaped biscuit had been eaten that very evening, but its impact lasted far longer than its sweet taste. Word of the incident spread quietly through the royal household, not as gossip, but as inspiration. Staff members who had witnessed the exchange found themselves looking at their own roles differently, understanding more deeply that their work was not just about maintaining an institution, but about caring for the people within it. The gardeners smiled more readily at visitors. The kitchen staff took extra care with their meals, and the cleaning crews hummed as they worked, all carrying a piece of Charlotte's compassion in their daily tasks. Colonel Williams submitted a detailed report of the incident to his superiors, carefully documenting both the breakdown in protocol and the extraordinary results that had followed. Rather than facing criticism, he found himself commended for his wisdom in allowing human decency to guide military discipline. The incident became a case study in leadership schools, teaching future officers about the importance of balancing rules with compassion. Princess Charlotte continued her daily walks through the castle grounds, and the guards began to look forward to her appearances. While she never again found it necessary to break protocol in such a dramatic way, her warm smiles and cheerful greetings became a highlight of their service. Several guards later reported that her presence helped them through difficult moments, proving that kindness, once given, continues to multiply and spread. Sergeant Thompson eventually sought professional help for his anxiety, inspired by Charlotte's example of courage in the face of difficult situations. The princess's willingness to risk breaking rules to help someone in need gave him the strength to risk vulnerability in order to heal. He began speaking openly with his fellow guards about mental health challenges, helping to break down the stigma that had kept many soldiers suffering in silence. The story of Charlotte's act of kindness eventually reached her parents, who were both moved and proud when they learned of their daughter's compassionate response to someone in distress. They used the moment as a teaching opportunity for all their children, reinforcing the message that true nobility came not from titles or position, but from how one treated others, especially those who were struggling. Miss Sarah often reflected on that morning as a turning point in her own understanding of what it meant to serve the royal family. She realized that her job wasn't just about maintaining schedules and protocols, but about supporting and learning from a young girl who seemed to understand instinctively what it meant to lead with love. The governess began incorporating lessons about empathy and courage into Charlotte's daily education, using real-life examples like the incident with Sergeant Thompson. Months later, when Charlotte celebrated her 9th birthday, Sergeant Thompson was among the guards assigned to ceremonial duty at the small private celebration. As she passed by him during the proceedings, he quietly whispered, "Thank you," and showed her a small flower pin he now wore on his uniform, a reminder of the day a princess's kindness had helped save him from despair. The flower-shaped biscuit incident became legendary within the royal household, passed down as a story that captured the essence of what the monarchy could be at its best. A force for compassion, understanding, and human connection that transcended class, protocol, and tradition. It reminded everyone that sometimes the most profound acts of leadership came in the smallest packages, and that true royalty was measured not by the crown one wore, but by the kindness one showed to others. Years later, when Princess Charlotte had grown into a young woman and begun taking on official royal duties, she would often think back to that morning in the castle courtyard. The memory would remind her that her greatest power lay not in her position or privilege, but in her ability to see when someone needed help and to act on that recognition with courage and compassion. The simple act of offering a homemade biscuit to a struggling guard had taught her a lesson about leadership that would guide her throughout her life, proving that sometimes the most important things we do are the ones that feel most natural and require no grand gestures, only an open heart and the willingness to reach out when someone needs a reminder that they are not alone.